you'd shared that you were going to announce the manufacturing location of the car by the end of this year. So I was wondering if you could give us an update on...
Well, we're still not at the end of the year.
Sure, we've got a couple months.
So, well, one of the things that we have sort of changed our strategy slightly is we are planning now to first launch the EMotion when we are ready with our solid-state battery technology. I personally feel that this could be one of the most important things that happens is when we finally get a breakthrough. We have definitely achieved a lot of things in the solid-state battery space. We're developing in-house at Fisker, and I see if we eventually get this thing into production, this could be a big breakthrough. So we will sort of let the solid-state battery technology dictate the launch of the EMotion. My hope is still that we can expect something around somewhere in 2020, and if it's later, then that's fine too. We won't launch the EMotion with normal batteries, today's batteries. We need to have the next generation. However, that said, the shifting in focus has also been the fact that at Fisker Inc. we are now very occupied with a high volume vehicle for a more affordable price. And we will announce something about that vehicle as well, sort of towards the end of the year. Okay. So we'll have a lot of announcements towards the end of the year, but we want to kind of get everything together and have some clear statements about what we're doing. And also there's of course a little bit of competitiveness in there as well. We don't want to give everything up to our competitors, and quite frankly, we're still several years out from launch of any passenger vehicles, so there's no point in announcing a whole bunch of things way too early when your whole strategy isn't 100% watertight. So we are waiting a little bit more to announce a few things. I think the main thing we are working on right now is, of course, continuing in our battery solid-state development, as well as our autonomous shuttle, without steering, without pedals. Without a steering wheel and without pedals, and that we're still planning around mid next year to kind of put into real testing on a corporate campus here in the U.S. where we collect data, understands people interactions with it, and also working on a unique business model for that, because as a small company we cannot afford to make that a loss leader. We have to make money on it, and so that's an important part of that project, to actually make a profitable business model for this type of vehicle.
Sure. Now that was the challenge when I was looking at the company. I mean, you've got the EMotion, you've got the Orbit, you've got the batteries, which is massive by itself. You've got the $40,000 car that you talked about on Fox. And there's so much going on, and as a small company it definitely makes sense to focus on the launch of Orbit and the batteries, which are really the disruptive technology within the disruptive technology. So one of the key enablers that the batteries bring is the fast charging, and you said you're working on an ultra fast charging network, which you obviously need for the disruptive battery. So how is that development coming along for the charger and that?
Well, so initially we were looking whether we should develop that ourselves, and looking at it, we just didn't find it was a financial viable business model for us to make our own sort of supercharged network. I think eventually the customer is interested in a infrastructure that can be used by any type of vehicle brand. And just like we have gas stations today, it doesn't make sense if every car maker had their own, unique charging infrastructure. So we have been in discussion with some of the groups that makes superchargers, whatever you call them, and I think that we're going to give some ideas to them, which we already have. And I think it sort of goes hand in hand with what technology is coming out and what do we need, meaning the ones who make the superchargers, what do we need to supply. So I think there will be several steps where we move forward, battery technology, the superchargers move forward. But I would say we are seeing some of the new superchargers coming out in the next couple of years that with our technology we would be able to charge fairly quick. So it's not necessarily yet to make a unique supercharger for us. Our aim is if we can get significant amount of battery charged in less than 10 minutes, you're starting to get very close to filling up a gas tank. And I think that's what we need to get to. And then the other side for us, which is maybe even more important in these early days of the electrification of vehicles is actually the range. I think most of traditional powered lithium-ion battery vehicles will be pretty close to around 300-mile range within the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that's pretty good, and it's going to be enough for a lot of people. Our aim with solid-state batteries is to get way beyond that, and we're going to have to see when we're ready with this. But that's definitely something we are keeping in mind, that could be a big differentiator.
Sure. Yeah, and so for the $40,000 vehicle, is that after EMotion, and is that driven by kind of the scale of the development of the solid-state batteries that happens with the EMotion, and then kind of stepping up, like, I mean, you get this a lot, and it's an unfair analogy, but like Tesla did with the Roadster, Model S, and then the Model 3, how it just got cheaper over time as they scaled up. Is that what you're seeing with the $40,000 vehicle? And
no, not necessarily. I think the good news for Fisker Inc. is we don't have to prove we can make a luxury car. We already did it with the Fisker Karma. And so we don't want to spend, you know, a major amount of the company's effort again proving we can make a luxury car, because people know that, and I think we have known that just on the base of the brand and the history. So therefore we will go kind of faster to the affordable high volume vehicle, and the EMotion could come out either simultaneously or even after the high volume vehicle. But the key here is that the major part of the effort of the company is actually going to be made on the high volume vehicle, the affordable vehicle. The EMotion, we are studying some different business models for that vehicle in terms of volume, and the tendency might be that we are going for an even lower volume for that vehicle, for lower cost tooling, more advanced materials. And that's something we're looking at right now, but the major effort on our company is the high volume vehicle.
Sure. And so for that $40,000 vehicle, the high volume vehicle, it sounds like that and the solid state batteries are the key focus. What types of volumes are you looking at? Because you need volume to get that price down, both for the batteries, but also for just the vehicle manufacturing. So what volumes are you looking at for the first couple of years for that?
So one of the lessons learned is not to predict volumes too quickly.
Sure.
I think that generally in the whole EV market, you know, it's clear that we are still in a growing, you know, overall segment, which is extremely small and is going to grow. We are barely getting into 1 million vehicles globally, and now we are growing into multi-million vehicle, but it's still a fairly small market. So I think prediction of volumes at this point is maybe a little early, but it's obviously, it has to be significant in the hundreds of thousands eventually. There's no doubt about it. We are taking a quite unique approach in the development of the vehicles, and I say vehicles with an S, because I believe you need to have a range of vehicles to make this truly work, so it's more than one vehicle. Of course, you have to start with one, and then there's several following. So, like I mentioned, it's too early for us to start predicting volumes. I think we first want to probably show a vehicle, kind of gauge the interest for it, and then maybe from there on starting to understand a little more what the volumes could be for such a vehicle.
Sure. Yeah, we saw that with Model 3. I mean, people weren't really sure what to expect. Even when they showed it off, everybody's like, well, there's all these hundreds of thousands of reservations, but the market, like the investors, weren't necessarily so sure about it. But then when they started producing them, finally got it up to scale, I think people are starting to believe that people actually want electric cars, and it's really just the price that's the barrier. So does that excite you to see those volumes coming out, and does that give you hope for where you guys are going with that price point, or do you feel like you need to be lower to hit the volume, or how are you feeling around that?
No, I think there's a clear, I think for several years there's been a growth in electric vehicles, and I think the main issue in my view has been that you don't have enough choice for the consumer. It's extremely limited choice. If you look just a couple of years ago, you just had a choice of hatchbacks or going all the way to a very expensive luxury vehicle. And even today, it's a very limited choice of a couple of hatchbacks and a sedan. So I think it's a matter of getting more choice available for the consumer. That's the first thing. Then we need an enhanced infrastructure, which is an infrastructure that should be available for all manufacturers, and there's a lot of efforts going on here in the US with that. So my view is that around 2021-22 is when you're going to see a drastic increase in electric vehicle sales. Before that, I think it's going to stay limited because of limited choice, limited infrastructure, and also, you know, even some of the battery technology. I mean, most vehicles that will come out next year or the year after were still developed 3-4 years ago, so they won't have some of the very latest technologies in them. So I think sort of the second generation of electric vehicles, which are purpose-built, which have taken a lot of lessons learned and have a lot of technology advancements, will arrive in around 21, 22. And I think that's when you're going to see electric vehicles being competitive on pricing, on profits for the automakers, and that's when I think you're going to see a steep rise in electric vehicle sales in the US.
Yeah, so I think the underpinning technology for me is the batteries, because that's not only the biggest financial chunk, but it has the potential to disrupt not just automotive, but you get scale from potentially selling to grid scale batteries, commercial, industrial, residential, and then all the way down to consumer products, like you guys have talked. And you mentioned that you might even be able to push your solid state batteries into consumer products as soon as this year. Is that still part of that focus on the solid state batteries, or are you going a different direction now that that's become more of a primary focus?
Well, so solid state batteries, so I think with any type of battery, you need different form factors. So if you put it into a cell phone versus put it into a car, it's two different size of batteries. We would like to, today, sometimes the same battery size used, but then you end up with thousands of cells in the vehicle, and what we want to do is create some larger format cells for the vehicle, and which will be different from a cell phone, for instance. So this year, right now, we are building cell phone size cells, pouch cells. So we're already looking at that. We're going to, for our own use, maybe put into a couple of devices, but it won't be for sale at this point. One of the things that we decided also this year is that we will not be building the batteries ourselves. We'll be we are talking with a couple of different groups in terms of licensing, and then you would see you know, a different type of battery being developed for non-automotive and then one for automotive. And obviously our main focus is automotive for sure, and that's our key focus right now, is getting automotive. But on the way to automotive, we anyway build small cells, which is why we mentioned that you know, for consumer products, it's something we're going to be able to test this year, but not for sale.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's just so much potential with the battery technology. It has my mind just spinning with energy storage. But I guess getting back to Orbit, you mentioned that you're going to be piloting that in the US on a campus. Can you tell us about where that is today, or is it still too early for that?
So we haven't announced which campus that is, but we are looking to starting driving that around and testing it on a campus for the second half of next year. And it's really about being able to take a fully autonomous vehicle and drive it in a geofenced area in a set route with virtual stops where you could ask it to stop, but it's not going to go off route. And I think that's the big difference to trying to sell a private person an autonomous vehicle where you have no idea where it goes, what situation it's going to be in, how it's that vehicle is being taken care of, etc. So we will obviously fully own and operate this vehicle, which I think enhances the safety dramatically, because we are going to be able to decide when it drives and when it doesn't. And because it's in a set route, we're also going to be able to do a lot more predictive in terms of what it's doing and where it's going. But I think the upside is that we'll have a lot of data, because we are developing a Fisker App where the people will sign up for it and they'll be able to ask the shuttle to stop. And the idea here is that more efficient transport. We're going to gather a lot of data to see, for instance, one of the things we don't know, how long should this vehicle stop? Is it 30 seconds, 45 seconds? And it has a countdown on your phone. And it's all about making convenience both for the person who's getting on the shuttle, but also the people who's waiting in the shuttle. So you don't want people in the shuttle to have to wait too long. You want that to be efficient too. So we are trying to drive optimal efficiency. We're also trying to make this shuttle desirable. A lot of people don't really find it that cool or exciting to go on a public transportation sort of bus. So for me, it's important that you need to make this efficient and desirable to actually get people to want to use it.
Yeah, I think it ties a lot to like the Bird scooters we see all over town, and kind of that on-demand service, but at the same time it's transit, and it gives you an opportunity to vet your autonomous technology. What stood out about the Orbit to me was that the design of the vehicle feels like a pretty drastic departure from your vehicles in the past.
Well, you know, for me it's really about, we see ourselves as an e-mobility and technology company. We don't see ourselves as a car company, and the reason is that I think if you plan only to sell private cars in the future, you can only go down in revenue, because people will still buy cars, but they will use it less. They will use other means of transportation, and we want to be part of as much of your journey as possible. And if your journey means you're getting out of your private car and into some other mobility device, we want to have that part of your journey too, and give you a Fisker experience which is going to be higher quality, more exciting than getting maybe in some other transport device. And by having a Fisker app, you're going to be able to immediately access some of these other Fisker devices, and we're looking at others than that shuttle. And I think that also means different designs. It's still, for me, the shuttle, when you see it in reality, is still a pretty impactful and exciting design. It doesn't have to look like a fridge on wheels just because it's not a privately owned car. And the interior, I think, is really dramatic, very cool, very inviting. And so we want to give that experience. When you own a Fisker car, you can also get into another cool vehicle. It's not because you move out of your own car that now it has to, from here on, be boring and unsatisfying. And so we are working on that future of transport and participating in that other type of mobility than your private car. And I think that's important for us to understand that field. And it's a new field. Nobody really knows exactly what these other devices, I mean, is it going to be flying taxis? Is it going to be shuttles? Is it going to be one-seater cars dumped everywhere like the scooters? Nobody really knows. And the key here is we need to also find a business model, because all these ideas sound great, but somebody has to pay for it. So you have to find out how do we pay for this, and we cannot afford this to be a loss leader. So we are working on a business model that actually work from the get-go and make us money.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think there's immense potential for autonomous mass transit, or even like micro transit, even though it's bigger than a private vehicle, but it's not a big articulating bus. That's interesting. So where do you see those scaling? Like, where's the most interest geographically for those Orbit vehicles?
Well, I think we obviously have it's great to have the long-term vision, which we do have, which maybe is 10 years out, where you see these autonomous, shuttles running around in mega cities and all that stuff. But until we get there, and there's a lot of legislation and infrastructure and other things, we have a shuttle we can actually put right next year in an environment without a new type of infrastructure. And I think that's the key, taking all these lessons learned and start refining this vehicle and maybe come up with other ideas of vehicle for the future. So one of the advantages with this size of shuttle, it's not much bigger than a minivan, but it can take 8 to 12 people depending on the configuration. It's really space efficient. We moved the electric motors out of the cabin and into the wheels. We're totally, of course, using the space because we don't have a driver anymore. So the interesting thing for me here is that if you need suddenly a big bus, you just couple 4 of these vehicles together and suddenly you've got the interior space of a big bus, and that you may need that in the rush hour. But when you don't need it, suddenly these 4 vehicles can now depart out to different routes, and they can be much more targeted to your needs, versus a big bus goes in the same route. It can only stop on these giant bus stops where you don't want to have to stand and wait, because it just isn't that great to stand and wait 5 minutes for a bus and then it's late and you're annoyed. So the whole idea is about optimization of our sort of mobility infrastructure, and that means the vehicles have to change as well. And for me, of course, as a designer, and I love beautiful cars, my view is it doesn't matter what means of transportation you go in, it should be exciting. Now, we obviously maybe not in the super lowest, cheapest segment, somebody else can take that segment, but I still think people would be willing to maybe pay a little bit extra if they can afford it, to just have a better quality of transport, more efficient, and generally higher quality. And that's the segment we want to be in, but it's going to start probably more like corporate campuses, maybe university, college campuses, parks, other areas which are a little more private land and a little more predictable versus throwing it into a center of a city right away.
Sure. I guess one last question. You had mentioned that solid-state batteries are a huge part of where you guys are going in the future for Fisker. Is part of that vision, you mentioned licensing and manufacturing, but is part of that vision licensing to other automotive manufacturers? Because there's a lot of opportunity for scale there, and we've seen most manufacturers are staying away from the actual battery production themselves, kind of pushing it out to Samsung, LG, Cattle, and the like. So is that something you guys are considering or looking into? Because that has the potential to enable a lot of other growth.
So I don't know how, I think a lot of maybe automotive manufacturers probably don't want to make their own battery. Right now we have some clear partners in mind who would get access to this battery in the beginning. And you definitely don't want to flood the market and just make it a commodity, because then you don't have your own business. I mean, we're spending our own money right now developing this. We're spending a lot of money, investors' money to develop this, so there's no point in licensing this out and make it cheap for everybody. We need to have a market advantage, at least for a few years. So we are planning to obviously use it ourselves, but also let a few others that are not direct competitors to us use the battery. And I think that's how it is with every technology. When you develop something, you try to have some competitive advantage in the beginning. The reason for licensing it out is simply because there's a lot of large companies out there that are not automotive, but they could be automotive suppliers or not, that would like to get into the next generation of battery technology, and they would have the means to scale up much quicker than we would. It is their specialty to do mass high volume manufacturing. And again, because we are probably going to go outside automotive as well, and so that's not really our business, so we'll have somebody else do it, and we will obviously get a licensing fee. So business model wise, it's better for us to have somebody else do it. So we are not talking about another car maker making the batteries. We're talking about either a large conglomerate that mass manufacture things already, or an automotive supplier making these batteries, and then we would agree to who they can sell it to in automotive in the beginning, so we don't sell it to our competitors. And then obviously non-automotive, we are fairly open. We do have already a couple of talks with a few non-automotive companies to have exclusivity in their segment as well, to give them some advantage in the beginning by having this battery.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, it's clear you're passionate about automotive and more than that, design and just making great and beautiful experiences. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. We're excited by the EMotion, the Orbit, the batteries, and we'll be keeping an eye out for those moving into production and I guess manufacturing and then production.
Thank you very much. Well, I think there's a lot of excitement out there. It's a great space to be in right now.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.